And we're back. Hello YouTube, it's Ryan from Enclosures with the final part, my favorite, painting. This is the part that really makes everything come alive. So Ecos paints is the paints that I use. They're zero VOC, they are expensive, but they are great paints. They're not real shiny, and they are animal safe is the most important part. They have a pet line. So I'm going to start out and I'm going to lay down a base coat. I'm using a gray on this one, a dark gray. I always try to start with a darker base coat and then work my way lighter versus the other way. One thing about this paint is the darker paints like black seems to not cover as well as white. White is a more dominant color than black in this, so it kind of works that way through the whole range. So the darker the color, the less dominant it is. So I would do a full base coat on everything, cover the armor coat and the putty epoxy. And this doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be a good coat covering everything. Make sure you get in all the little cracks and everything, because if not you'll see foam or whatever sticking through. This is the important base layer. The paint goes quite a ways. It's expensive. It's about 45 bucks a quart, so figure 5-6 colors can run you a little bit of cash, but it is worth it. So now this part here, it's one of my favorites. This is dry brushing. It's an easy technique if you've never learned it. It's not hard to find tutorials online, but essentially all you're doing is just putting a little bit of paint and really lightly brushing over it. As you brush, you know, less and less paint is on the brush, so it actually works better as you get farther, or less paint on the brush the more you've painted. That's what you want. That's the dry brush. So a lot of times I'll dip it just a little bit, and then I will wipe that off on something if need be. This is what will really make your rocks come alive, is doing the dry brush. You can see how I'm just barely touching it, and all you're doing is you're hitting the high spots. That makes the rocks look more worn than if you were to just do a solid paint on it. So this is just my second coat of paint, my second color of paint. I'm using quite a bit of contrast, and you can do 2-3 coats that are real close. You can vary it up whatever end color you're going for. This one here, I like the real dark to light contrast. I think it really makes the rocks kind of come alive. But it's really easy. Once you get the hang of it, I use a paper plate. I'll dip it, brush it on a paper plate so you don't have much paint on it, and then just go to town, just kind of brushing you're trying to hit the high spots is what you're trying to do, and that way the low spots stay dark, which gives you a more worn look and more depth. And then we'll go back here in just a little bit and do some more details, but depending on what you're going for is the colors you're going to use and the contrast between them. There's desert and more arid ones use more colors than I do in these darker gray ones. So for highlights, I'm using a little bit lighter. It's hard to tell in the video, but a little bit lighter yet. And I'm just going to hit the high spots. I'm just almost like touch it and then dry brush over it again. What that does is that puts your focuses your lighter colored paint on the higher spots yet again, kind of like we were doing, but a little more focused, which still gives it a little bit more of a worn look. So I hit cracks, things I want to highlight. The detail part is kind of the fun part. It's what really makes it start to look like rocks. You can see on that crack right there how it really brightens up the edge of it, makes it look deeper and more realistic. The thing with this is you want to experiment with colors. Sometimes I'll go to a dark color again to kind of cover up something if it's a little too light. Sometimes I'll go lighter. Sometimes I'll add in a little bit of color in spots, a little rusty orange or some blue, or you can get creative with it and see what works. And if it doesn't, just start over. Just paint a base coat again and redo that part. Now this is even more defined. I'm using a smaller brush to put the paint on the high spots. What it is when a rock gets worn, it becomes lighter. If you've ever seen rocks, you dig a rock out of the ground, the underneath the ground part is real dark, the top is lighter because it's been weathered. So that's what really gives a good effect to it, by painting edges and things that might be worn more with the elements to paint them lighter. And then you can, even how I'm doing here, you can go back with a bigger brush and dry brush after you paint on with the small brush too. which just gives it keeps it a little more in certain areas, but still gives you that effect, the same effect that you were going for with the dry brush. There you can see I used the dry brush on it, and that brush had no paint on it. It was just a dry. I'm just kind of smudging around the paint that I'm putting on with the little brush. All right, add a little bit of yellow. That's kind of what you'd think, oh, that's a weird color, but just that little bit of yellow gives it a brownish, or I guess more of a dirtyish tint to it, and brings out just more color. You don't look at a rock, it's not one color. So the more little details and colors you add in, you just have to experiment to find out what really adds it. This is actually, say yellow, but it's more of a goldenrod, a little bit of a brown tint to it, and I mix paint as I go. Here's brown. If that brown isn't what I want, I'll mix a little yellow, a little white, a little black, whatever, to change the tone of it as I go. And you're not doing much of this, you're just doing a little bit, and then you're dry brushing it to kind of, I say smear it around, but essentially thin it out so it's not such a harsh color in there. This is really, it is one of the funnest parts. Now the finer details, I'm using green, and you say, wow, why green? I'm also using a real, they call it sea sponge or a real sponge. I'm going to add in moss. And to do this, I'm going to use either 2 or 3 colors of green, and sometimes even a little bit of white or yellow into it. And you're just dabbing it. I switch it up every now and then. I'll use a darker green and then a brighter green. The brighter green you want is almost a lime green, but the darker green kind of gives it a little more realism, I guess. And then you can use either a white or yellow or a really bright green or a white. You can mix a couple to get the fine details in the moss to really make it look like it's, it makes it look real. It looks like a moss on those rocks. You know, I would say that's second in comparison to doing a real moss, but I love it. I love the look when you put the moss in it. It really makes it come out and stand alive. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully these tutorials help you guys out.